Friday morning with Esther and Phil. Plenty coming up for you this morning, but let's start with the biggest stories of the day.
And Boris is back in the thick of things and has been sent the findings of an investigation into whether he misled Parliament over the Downing Street parties.
Boris has been given 2 weeks to make representations in response to any criticism from the MPs. The committee will then deliver its verdict to the House of Commons, which will decide whether to approve or reject their recommendations.
His resignation list has also come under fire, with reports 2 MPs have been cut from it. Well, we're joined now by Associate Politics Editor of the Daily Telegraph, Chris Hope. Chris, thanks for joining us. Your big story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today about Boris and the Privileges Committee. Have we got any idea what might be in this report and how serious it's going to be for Boris?
Not yet, Phil. We're getting mood music. I understand that these 2 new police investigations into alleged lockdown breaking in Chequers and Downing Street that were revealed a couple of weeks ago, that has not formed part of the investigation by the Privileges Committee. That's based on the Sue Gray report from last year, which laid out various parties that went on during the COVID pandemic in 10 Downing Street. So that might reflect well for Johnson. It means that just the Sue Gray report is the focus rather than any new allegations we may have heard about Johnson, and which he denies, of course, on these lockdown parties. So we're waiting to see the committee, the 7-strong committee, 4 Tory MPs, 3 from the opposition. They are very, very tight-lipped. They're treating it like a jury. If you go near them or talk to them, they'll clam up straight away if you try and ask anything about this inquiry. What will happen next is on the 22nd of June, it should emerge what the allegations are and what the Privileges Committee has decided to do. The following week, on June 29th, MPs will vote on the findings, and crucially and unusually, because it's an MP being looked at by the Privileges Committee not the Standards Committee, which has ordinary people on it, members of the public, it can be amendable. So when this vote is put to the House of Commons, MPs can amend the motion. If they think the punishment is not strong enough, they can increase it. If it is too weak, if it's too strong, as some allies might say, it can be reduced. So there's a battle for Johnson, which will emerge and erupt in the House of Commons on the June 29th. For me, the Tory party has a choice here. Opposition MPs will vote to ban him for as long as they can to try and trigger a by-election. But I think Tory MPs, and you may agree, Esther and Phil, have a chance here to unite and maybe support Johnson when he needs their help as a way of burying the last 12 months of chaos behind the party.
Well, we have been talking about this, Chris. What would people do? And I think after the uproar of the Owen Paterson situation, where it wasn't a free vote, I know Rishi will be having this as a free vote, we were told to vote a certain way, I think MPs will be reluctant to go against what the Privilege Committee has put forward. So you might not be find that people will want to play games either way. That doesn't stop the Labour Party putting something forward, and Conservatives will probably oppose that. But I think they might say, look, what has the Privileges Committee put forward, and we'll vote for this. But it is a knife's edge for Boris at the moment, because really he needs this to be less than a 10-day suspension, doesn't he? So we might be putting through, I don't know, some reasons against the findings against him.
That's right. If it's less than 10 days or fewer than 10 days, then Lindsay Hurrell does not have to order a local referendum in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. And if more than a certain number of local constituents want a recall by-election, that's what Johnson will face, and that will happen. There was a poll recently, of course, Michael Ashcroft did a poll that recently, a rare poll of a constituency, and found out that Johnson would probably win a by-election, according to his poll, were one to be held. I was talking to Labour figures last night, and they were saying they also wouldn't want to go against the committee's findings, that they would want to. Harriet Harman is the chairman. She's very well respected. She's the mother of the House of Commons. They would want to go against her findings. It'd be disrespectful towards her. So although in theory, Labour and Tory MPs can amend the motion and make it a tougher or a weaker sanction for Johnson, they may well not do for the reasons you say.
Chris, there's obviously a lot of speculation at the minute about Boris Johnson's resignation honours list, and there's speculation coming out that perhaps Nadine Dorries and Alok Sharma might have been removed from it to avoid potentially difficult by-elections for the government. What's the latest on that? Is that mere speculation, or is there something in that?
It is currently speculation. There were 4 MPs loyal to Boris Johnson who were going to get peerages, as was disclosed a few months ago. We think Sir Alok Sharma, we think Nadine Dorries, Alistair Jack was another one.
Nigel Adams, I think.
Adams too. Those are the 4. But the idea had been that there would be promised peerages in this list and remain as MPs until the election to avoid difficult by-elections. And that is a bridge too far, it seems, for the authorities that run this system. They think that if you're going to become a peer and leave Parliament, you do it now, because the idea is you wouldn't be acting independently for the next 18 months. You'd be subject to a kind of promise of a future preferment. So I think it looks like they might be back in the mix to avoid having by-elections. We will know soon enough. I'm waiting for your knighthood, Phil.
So we both... But one final question there, Chris, and this is about the emerging story now about Rachel Reeves, a struggle at the top of the Labour Party there. Were they going to have this sort of new green policy, basically borrowing £28 billion a year for sort of green industry? She seems to have kicked it into the long grass, going obviously against Ed Miliband and Keir there. I don't know. Have I lost Chris?
I think Chris.
I'm back now. I'm back now.
Back now. Did you hear the question about Rachel Reeves?
I'm guessing it was about this delay to the green investment they've announced today. So they're going to be they're going to spend £28 billion on this dash for green growth, but in the second half of the next Parliament. They were going to do it every year for the 5 years, and there were concerns about the impact that would have on borrowing and debt costs. So I think it sounds like they're recognising the economic reality. People are scrambling right now to secure mortgages. It's got to calm down. So I think this is sensible by Labour.
Yeah, they said that. They also, I think, did polling and saw that it was an electoral dead weight of a policy, so they can dress it up how they like about sound economics, but it was a dead weight of a policy. Chris Hope, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the latest there in the world of politics. Now, following a string of dreadful scandals and structural flaws, a watchdog has called for broader powers to restore confidence in the police. Inspectors will be able to order failing police forces to improve when there are serious concerns for public safety.
Chief Inspector of Constabulary Andy Cook stated that public trust in the police was hanging by a thread and that there was a limited window of opportunity to restore it. Well, joining us to give us his insight is Rick Muir, the Director of the Police Foundation. Rick, do you accept Andy Cook's overall premise that the trust in the police is hanging by a thread and that there's a limited window of opportunity to restore it? Would you accept that analysis?
Yeah, I do accept that analysis, Phil. I think that if you look at the polling on this, it's quite clear that the percentage of people saying they think the police are doing a good job has fallen by quite a bit over the last 5 years in particular. It's only about half of the people polled now say that they think the police do a good job, and that's pretty low by British standards. The police have generally had, strong support from the public, and we've also seen the same thing with, asking people do they trust the police. That's also taken a big hit. So I think Andy Cook is absolutely right. I think policing it's a watershed moment for policing at the moment, and the service really needs to get its act together to respond.
I mean, he's said, hasn't he, we want to get rid of woke policing and wake up, get out of politics, smarten up and deliver for the people. Do you think that's the right order to do things?
Well, I think the issue is, one of the things that he said, which I think is absolutely right, is there's been a loss of focus on the basics. And the basics, I think, are really neighbourhood policing and resolving crime, making sure that victims of crime get a decent response from the police. And there's been a lack of focus on that. A lot of that is not the police's fault. Obviously, they lost quite a lot of resources during austerity. They've also had this big increase in things like sexual crime that they've had to respond to, which is much more complex to investigate. And they ended up having to deal with lots of things like mental health incidents and things because other services weren't dealing with those things effectively. So this is not all the police's fault. But I think what we do need to see them now is focus on those basics of resolving crime for victims and neighbourhood policing and working in partnership so that other services, particularly local authorities and health, can deal with some of the other things that the police have ended up dealing with. And we have seen some good examples of that. The police in Humberside have come up with an arrangement whereby police officers won't go to a lot of incidents related to mental health, that they have been, and they're expecting now the NHS to do much more of that. And I think that's the right kind of approach.
You say though, Rick, that the police have got stretched resources, and lots of people will sympathise with that view. But if somebody makes an allegation of being misgendered or something, or when a gollywog's on display in a pub, it seems that they've got plenty of resources then to go in mob-handed in order to arrest people for things like that. Is it not surely a question of how they prioritise their resources?
But it's always a question of prioritisation, and I think broadly what's happened is that what's been prioritised is not actually the things that you described. For I think what's been prioritised is normally violent crime, sexual crime, dealing with mental health issues, those kind of things, and that has taken up a lot of police time. Now I think the mental health stuff can be dealt with by other services stepping up to the plate on that, and I think the police service is making moves there. But what we really need to see them do now is really focus on resolving crime, because the charge rates have halved in 7 years. People are ringing up about burglaries; they're getting no investigations, and this is the kind of bread and butter stuff the public expect the police to deal with. So I don't agree that it's all about them responding to these some of these so-called woke issues. I don't think that's really the driver here. I think they've been hit by increased in lots of different types of demand on their time, and they've had to ration their resources. But
Andy, I presume, one of his things was to sort of stay out of politics and to prioritise fighting crime. So I guess that woke agenda Phil was talking about did obviously go up the priority list. But another thing that Andy Cook had said was that when they give recommendations, then from the watchdog, as it were, the police force either don't do it quick enough or they just don't do it thorough enough, and this forcing those recommendations rather than them having to deal with them if they can will be a priority. I'm going to have to force you for a quick answer, but do you see that as a good thing, being able to force those recommendations on the police forces?
Yeah, I do. I do think we need to have a way of making sure that recommendations are followed through. Not all of the recommendations, but the ones that are absolutely key. I think HMIC should have some additional powers there. The Home Secretary currently has powers, but we don't want the Home Secretary having to intervene all the time in policing. And so I think giving those powers to the Chief Inspector would be a good way forward.
Dr. Rick Muir, Director of the Police Foundation, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. A lot of this is about leadership as well, though, isn't it? Have they got the right people leading the police? There was a scheme a few years back to allow outsiders to join the police at superintendent level in order to get people, with strong management skills outside of the police to come in and that's been paused. I think that's a mistake to pause it. I
asked Rick, as you did there, about sort of the prioritisation and Andy Cook, and I knew Andy Cook here because he was from the Merseyside Police Force, but he said quite clearly, prioritise crime over political interference, provide better investigations, more bobbies on the beat, which is what we need to feel safe, smarten up. I totally agree with that. You can see somebody's disciplined if they're all smartened up. And as I said, there's this enforcement of the recommendations, which I'm afraid they weren't doing quick enough.
Right, coming up, migration levels could be heading towards unprecedented levels by 2046, according to the latest report released by Migration Watch UK. We'll be joined by Mal Mehmet to discuss this, so don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Friday morning with Esther and Phil. Time now is 10:24. Some of your views have been coming in. Has Boris's shine lost? Has it gone?
Well, it's certainly gone as far as Graham's concerned. Graham says, morning, Esther and Phil. Boris used to be fascinating, if not a bit odd, but now he's become like Trump, a complete bore. Fed up of hearing about Boris returning as leader. It's ridiculous. He had his chance and blew it. So he certainly lost his lustre.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've got any views against that, what Graham's sent in. Do give us your views, gbviews@gbnews.com. Tell us what you're thinking this morning. Join in with the show.
Now, the UK population is on course to rise by nearly 16 million by 2046 at present levels of net migration, a report by think tank Migration Watch UK has found.
The report suggests that if net migration continues at the current levels and the birth rate of about 1.53 births per woman remains roughly the same, the population will increase to between 83 and 87 million by 2046. Well, we're joined now by the chairman of Migration Watch, Alp Melmet. Morning to you today. So, Alp, these are shocking figures here. I think there's one thing we can all agree on. These figures are all too high. Do we have a bit of an excuse this year with the people who we've been letting in, whether it was from Afghanistan, whether it was from Ukraine? Is there a bit of a distortion there in your figures then?
Well, even if you were to take out the numbers from Ukraine, the numbers from Hong Kong, you're still talking about around 450,000 people. And that in itself is huge and will mean population growing by a great deal more, probably around 80 million, growing to about 80 million. That's 16 million more than we've got now, 13, 14, 15 million more than we have at the moment. So really, the point is that with net migration at its current levels, even if it were to fall slightly, and I don't see that happening, frankly, for a number of reasons, including the very loose points-based system that is in place. If it were to happen, we are still talking about massive increases in population and a massive increased need for things like housing. That is what we're saying.
I mean, I think we can all agree that immigration levels are too high. They're unsustainable, that it puts a massive amount of pressure, as you say, on housing, on public services. I don't think many people would disagree with that. I guess the question is, what's the solution to the problem? The government used to have an intention to get the numbers down to the tens of thousands. What would you like to see them do? Would you like to see them enshrine maybe that target of no more than 100,000 in law and actually have a hard target, or would that be too severe and wouldn't be flexible enough?
Well, it's up to people like you, Philip. It's up to you, Esther. The fact is that net migration at current levels is going to prove catastrophic in all sorts of ways. Having less than 100,000 people coming in net, that's not the numbers actually coming in. That's net, taking away the people who are going to leave. That will immediately reduce the rate of population growth. And ultimately, it will mean fewer houses will be needed and fewer pressures on the NHS and the rest of it. That's a fact.
Alp, were you pleased to see today that the EU have come together with a response, with a proposal to cut back these migration numbers after years of talking about it?
Well, let's wait and see what the EU actually does. I think that they were focusing as much as anything on illegal migration rather than legal migration, which is what I'm talking about. Legal migration, which is running at, 10 times and more the rate at which we're having illegal migration in the country.
So are you
so much more important.
So are you concerned then with the changes that Suella Braverman is going to introduce to get down the backlog of people on waiting lists? She's going to change the Priti Patel format to separate out illegal from legal. She's going to make them all legal, viewed as legal, so they can get through the backlog quicker. Are you a bit worried about that?
It's not a case of being worried. I think it's a nonsense, and it just shows weakness in the government. What it's effectively saying is, it's okay, however you come, we're going to let you stay. And that is not what people in this country, as you know better than I do, Esther, that is not what people in this country want. The fact is that it's being done in order to reduce the backlog, and it's an amnesty in anything but name. That's wrong.
Alp Mehmat, Chairman of Migration Watch, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. I think it was I'll tell you what I thought was interesting was that there's obviously been a massive amount of focus on all the boats coming across the channel. Rightly so, it is an absolute scandal. But it numbers about 50,000 a year, and as Alp says, 10 times that are coming in legal immigration.
620,000.
And perhaps maybe there's been not enough focus on that because of the small boats crossing. There's been the eye off the ball on legal immigration, which is a much bigger issue.
Yes, and that's why I asked him that question, which Suella Braverman announced today. Was he concerned with that? And absolutely he did. He said that's an amnesty in all but name. Interesting that if people do think that that's what it is.
Anyway, coming up, with 4 in 10 cancer patients waiting too long to begin life-saving treatment, we'll be speaking to a leading oncologist about that.
Also, as airport strikes threaten to disrupt summer travel plans, we'll be joined by the CEO of Advantage Travel Partnership, Julia Lowe-Blue said, for her take on this. But first, it's your news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you. Good morning. It's 10:31. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Former US President Donald Trump has been indicted on charges of retaining classified documents at his Florida estate. A source close to the case says he faces 7 criminal charges. This is the second time Trump has been indicted. He's the first former US president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Trump has accused the government of election interference. He's campaigning to make a return to the White House in 2024. A Syrian refugee who stabbed a group of toddlers in France, including a British girl, had been denied asylum in the country just days before the attack. The French Interior Minister says the claim was refused because the 31-year-old had already been granted asylum in Sweden 10 years ago. 4 children and 2 adults were injured in the attack yesterday in the town of Annecy. The 3-year-old British girl, who was there on holiday, remains in hospital in a stable condition. A teenage boy named locally as Saul has died after his e-bike collided with an ambulance in Salford. Greater Manchester Police says its officers had been following a teenager before their car was blocked off by bollards. The collision happened a short time later. The incident has been referred to a police watchdog. And a heat health alert has been raised from yellow to amber in eastern and southern England, as well as the Midlands ahead of the weekend. The alert issued by the UK Health Security Agency is already in place and lasts until Monday morning. It warns that high temperatures of up to 28 degrees Celsius could affect people's health. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2540 and €1.1652. The price of gold is £1,565.32 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,605 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. It's 10:37.
It certainly is. Now,
Oh.
Sorry. I was thinking that was me, not you. Carry on.
Hospital waiting lists in England have reached a record high of 7.4 million, with the number of patients waiting for appointments rising by nearly 1 million in the past year.
So tens of thousands of cancer patients also face life-threatening delays. The new NHS data also shows that 4 in 10 cancer patients have to wait too long to begin treatment, including chemotherapy and surgery.
Health leaders have highlighted the root of this as a staffing shortage, with vacancies of 112,000 staff, including 43,000 nurses.
Well, we're joined now by oncologist Professor Angus Daglish to discuss this. So waiting lists too long, diagnosis too long, and obviously that has a massive impact on the patient. So how are we going to turn this round?
Well, first of all, I think you need to look at the causes of this. And I mentioned right at the beginning when lockdown was introduced that it would in the end cause far more damage than it could ever possibly save from the NHS. And the recent report from America and Sweden said we probably only saved 1,700 lives from COVID, but we've now got excess deaths of 10 to 20%. 3 years after this was, and a lot of this was introduced. A lot of these deaths now are going to be cancer patients because of the effect of lockdown. They weren't being checked and diagnosed. We're very good at spotting people who are likely to develop cancer, and we can pick it up early. Now, I've got a very good friend who basically, with this, has been a victim of this because the screening you should have had every year was cancelled year 1, year 2, year 3, and now he has the cancer, which would have been completely picked up early, and all the current treatment would be avoided. And this is going on tens of thousands of cases across the country. That's the first thing. The second thing is, why do we not have enough staff to deal with this crisis? Well, I mean, we've really got to look at the core of this. Why do my colleagues leave in droves? Well, first of all, it seems to be the Treasury's obsession of getting rid of all consultants by inducing penal tax rates and thresholds, which make it just not worth working beyond a certain time. So the majority of staff now are working 3 to 4 day weeks, because if you want to do a proper job and work a full 5 day week, you're ending up actually losing money. And this has to be addressed.
Yeah. And that pension change has been addressed, and you're quite right, and rightly so. It did need to be addressed. Phil.
Yeah, I mean, where would you rank the different parts of what's causing this issue? I mean, you've mentioned about the pandemic and the lockdowns and the fact that nobody was doing these things, and clearly that's a massive issue. The NHS seem to be blaming it on staff shortages. There's obviously strike action. Some people might say chronic mismanagement within the NHS. I mean, how would you rank each of these Do they all fit into the outcome that we're seeing at the moment, which is 7.4 million people on a waiting list?
Well, all these things are playing a part. The chronic mismanagement of the NHS is the core thing, and you know I've been campaigning to get rid of the NHS structure as it is and return to clinically led services with a very efficient management to support them. The second thing, in order to do this, you have to have retention. And I do a lot of questioning of my colleagues and GPs, patients, etc. The morale of doctors is at an all-time low. I mean, if you are a doctor and you really enjoy looking after your patients and you get some pleasure from it, you're constantly bombarded with requests, not requests,
But what about strike action, and what about managerial mismanagement?
I think the NHS mismanagement is the cause, and the complete collapse of morale is the cause of the NHS strikes, because they feel that this is the only way they can going to get heard and traction. Because
if people are going to be on strikes and you are going to have massive waiting lists, I guess you need to give advice out. We had Carol Sikora, didn't we, on the other week, talking about persistency to be seen and also self-diagnose and doing self-checks. So we've got our very own presenter on this station, Anne Diamond, and she's just revealed now what she's had to go through with breast cancer, and luckily it was because she did do breast cancer checks all the time. Very moving. She'll be back with us on Saturday, but just let's see what she said to Dan Wootton last night.
And that was like 9:30 in the morning, but I knew then, because I'd already seen my GP, that I had to go to a breast cancer screening thing later in the morning. And I thought I would just go for a mammogram and, a couple of tests, and I'd be free in an hour. And I spent the entire morning at my local hospital. They did everything: biopsies, X-rays, CT scans, couple of mammograms, everything. And in the end, by lunchtime, I was still there. And a lovely lady with a lanyard around her neck that said Macmillan Cancer Care. And I knew then that it was serious.
Well, I listened to all of that. I listened to GB News on radio overnight time, and I listened to all of that last night. Deeply, deeply moving, but very pragmatic there. So would your advice to everybody now, do these checks on yourself, particularly for women, because that was the only way sort of Anne knew that she had breast cancer?
Well, obviously, the answer to this is yes. People have to take responsibility for changes and not rely, changes in themselves and odd symptoms and signs. There are many, many sites which give you advice. If you have persistent problems for over 3 weeks or so, you should consider getting it checked out by a doctor, which is easier said than done. I mean, I've had very, very good friends who have reached that point, and they wanted to see a GP, realise that they need to do something urgently and they can't see one for 3 weeks. I mean, the whole system has these backlogs. And I wanted to go back to the point I was making about the morale, where the management interfere with the doctor's ability to see patients all the time, putting them on endless courses and endless appraisals, validation, etc., which is not the way to retain a workforce. And I can speak from experience that it's been the tipping point for some of my senior colleagues. I can't stand this anymore. I'm leaving. Now, those doctors could have given several good, valuable years looking at patients.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. And I think the points you raise are very valid indeed. Thank you for joining us.
Now we're joined now by former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan, and Charlie Rowley, former special advisor to Michael Gove, to discuss the stories we've been covering this morning. We started with Boris, with Chris Hope, John. What do you make of this, the Privileges Committee? Do you think that anybody will try and amend it, as Chris Hope was speculating, to try and make it over 10 days or less than 10 days, depending on what the committee does? Or do you think everyone will just go with what the committee decides?
You guys know probably better than me the mood of the House, but my view will be that the House will want to accept the penalty, whatever it is. There will be some people who want to contest it. Some people, there's still a fan club for Boris on the backbench, like I understand. He's a very charismatic figure, and you know, friendships in politics are important. You should never betray them. But I kind of think people want to see this done and dusted. I think the public do, and I think certainly the colleagues I know want to see it dealt with. So it should just be a clean recommendation with a clean vote on it, and then let the voters decide.
Will Labour have been slightly concerned by the poll that Lord Ashcroft did that showed that if there was a by-election in his seat, Boris would actually win it? Might that have?
We all fell off our seats, rolling with laughter. Honestly, it seems very unlikely that there's one little bit of London in which there's a massive swing to the Tories. He's a popular guy, but the demographics have been moving against Boris it's got the highest black and minority ethnic community of any Tory-held seat. All of the dynamics are going against him, and people don't like to have a by-election forced on them.
So you're saying he'd have lost if it had gone?
Oh, I think if there's a by-election, if there's a petition and a by-election, he'd lose.
Charlie, I was struck by this speculation today about the resignation honours list, and that Nadine Dorries and Alok Sharma might be taken off it in order to avoid potentially damaging by-elections. What do you make of that? It seems quite extraordinary, really.
It does. I mean, I think, look, we heard originally that there was over 50 people that were being put forward for honours of some description under Boris Johnson, a number of those going to the Lords, which include people like great people, like Alistair Jack, you know, the Scottish Secretary, who I think is standing down. And Nigel Adams also has announced he's standing down in not too far from, I think, your neck of the woods.
He's a Yorkshire MP, absolutely.
So I think there is a lot there, and I think, you know, not only with Nadine Dorries and Alok Sharma, but also Stanley Johnson, Johnson Senior being sort of struck off that list. So I think trimming it down, making it not quite headline news as it might have been previously, is not such a bad thing. But I think, look, those peerages may or may not come in the not too near distant future for Nadine and Alok, even if it isn't just on this time round.
I think it was good to streamline it for many reasons. Public perception, as much as anything else, practicalities and by-elections.
A nominee for each day of your prime ministership.
Yeah, well, all parties have done that, though, haven't they? And that's really why the House of Lords is being viewed so dismally at the moment. But what I want to say to you was the Rachel Reeves policy there. Yeah. It was going to be the big Labour policy. A lot, £28 billion a year of borrowing for green industry. It's meant to, they've polled it, and it actually is sinking faster than a piece of lead. They've covered it up as sort of like an economic reason, but really it was just, it didn't float with the public, did it, this 28 billion for green borrowing?
It's bad branding. You shouldn't call something a green strategy. When voters hear the word green, they think you're coming with their wallet. You should have called it a reindustrialisation strategy, an industrial strategy. There was an announcement in Scunthorpe yesterday, which was about green steel, about hydrogen being used rather than carbon to create steel. That was about jobs. The story of Labour's industrial strategy, which is what the decarbonisation strategy is jobs, jobs, jobs. So why not lead on jobs? Always say jobs. These are jobs. These are high-quality jobs. These are working-class jobs.
But they were wanting to lead with the whole green agenda. That was their USP. They didn't want to call it job. They did. I mean, the fact that they're in bed with Dale Vince
we've learned from the
and Just Stop Oil.
So we've learned from the great Joe Biden. Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act is a massive piece of infrastructure investment. First spending is prioritised for red areas, red states, Trump voting areas. So it's Republicans who are getting the money spent first, which has meant, actually, during the debt ceiling negotiations, there was not a single Republican congressman going, can you take that money out of the Inflation Reduction Act infrastructure spend? So I think you've got to have good politics, and Rachel's done good politics. Neutralising it now, 18 months away from the election, is much, much better than having a flurry in the election.
So it was a bad policy, so change it to jobs, don't say green, the public don't want green, except they're not being quite honest either, because they're just delaying it now, aren't they?
I love that. If you mention the word green, people think you're coming for their wallets. I think that's a great... I think it's true as well, to be perfect.
Well, that is the truth, isn't it? It was.
The other big story, Charlie, of course, is about the police and the report into the police from the Inspector of Constabulary. Do you accept that the police have got a crisis of trust amongst the public? And if so, what do you think's causing it, and what's the solution?
Well, I think we use crisis a lot in lots of different areas. I'm not quite sure it's a crisis, but it's certainly a concern, a real concern, because I think we've heard so many stories over the last few years where there has been this breakdown in trust between the police and the communities. Yeah. I think what Sir Mark Rowley's doing, of no relation, for the tweeters out there.
Nepo baby.
But I do think he's doing a great job in the Met, because I think he's really opened the car bonnet and said, look, there are issues in my police force. There are bad eggs, bad apples who I need to root out, who shouldn't have been in the police force in the first place, where we need to increase vetting to make sure that if you are a bobby on the beat, someone that has got the powers to arrest, to detain, to enforce the law, that they are going to be someone that is of the highest of calibre and standards, who we can have that trust in. I think there will always be issues around policing, such as stop and search, which I do support, but I think that has to be in the circumstances where it's absolutely warranted and justified. But I know there's always a breakdown in police, whether it's communities, particularly in urban areas in London. There's certainly a breakdown in policing between women in this country and police because of cases like Sarah Everard. And so, there has to be a real PR and public relations exercise in order to ensure that people in communities across this country do have that faith in the police.
We did a poll, didn't we, ourselves,
yes,
on trust in police, and it had fallen. People did say it had fallen. So this hanging by a thread and this urgency, which I think Andy Cook has brought into this, important, do you think?
Oh, look, I think it's important to get to the core of this. The cops aren't doing their job. You can't stop women being sexually assaulted, you can't stop young men being stabbed, and you can't protect middle-aged people from computer fraud in their own homes. You keep going, that's nothing to do with us. It's like the cops have to do their job. The one thing I would say is they should stop racist stop and search. Like you need, to police properly, you need support of the community, the whole community. The black community need to get respected and listened to.
Why is it racist?
Why is it racist? Because a much higher proportion of young black men get stopped.
But a proportion of young black men are carrying knives, are committing those knife crimes.
Most stop and searches find nothing, but what they do is they make people resent the police. The police have to operate with consent, and the police need to operate on the basis of community intelligence.
Most people who die in London from knife crime are young black men. They're the ones who are suffering from this.
But black families aren't saying. Black families are not saying harass our young people. They're saying stop the crime. And stop the knife crime has to be stopped, and the police are completely failing.
I'll say one of the police watchdog's 5 key points was research and explain the deterrent value of stop and search. So he's not saying don't do it, he's saying explain it, why it needs to be done, because it is a good deterrent. So I think that's the right thing to do. You don't stop it, but you do actually explain why you're doing it, because it is meant to be intelligence-led, which is what you said. If more black people have knives or what have you, it's intelligence-led, but it's got to be explained.
I mean, what do you think, John, about... I mean, in terms of public trust with the police, I mean, do you think people see cases like the Sarah Everard case and lose trust in the police entirely on the back of it? Or do they think that person's just an individual and every bad organisation has bad people? And is it more the not dealing with Just Stop Oil protesters, for example, that undermines confidence in the police as a whole rather than individual cases?
We'll have a separate conversation on this, because I'm a big supporter of Just Stop Oil, and I always retweet.
Your Labour Party,
not me.
Your leader,
I'm just an ordinary party member in my constituency party. But look,
But the politicisation, I mean, that's what he was saying. We don't want the woke, we don't want the politicisation, to see police taking the knee or fist-bumping Just Stop Oil or not doing the job. This is what has lost the confidence in the public.
Mark, Macpherson found correctly the Metropolitan Police were institutionally racist. The inquiry... the inquiries that the Baroness did into found them to be institutionally misogynist as well. There's something about the Metropolitan Police that requires it to be abolished and refounded. Let's have a police service for London, or a police service for Londoners. I think they need taking apart and rebuilding.
They did say the vetting, recruitment had to be, and I think the recruitment and the vetting really does have to be smartened up.
Yeah.
Smartened up.
Do you think that do you take John's view about the police and that they're racist and they should stop and search and things like that?
No, but I agree with John that the police should do their job, and I think part of their job is policing for all of the public, protecting all of the public, which includes hard-working people that want to go to work, that are stopped by people like Just Stop Oil, where the police should probably take, I think, a bit more of a tougher approach to clear the streets and to make sure that you can have ambulances getting to the emergencies that they need to attend, allow people getting to work. You're policing for the whole of the public, not just for certain aspects of it.
Charlie, thank you very much indeed. And John, you'll be back with us in the next hour, and you can tell us why you're such a big fan of Just Stop Oil. We're not. He is. But anyway, coming up, we'll be sharing the first clips of our exclusive interview with the Marks & Spencer's chairman, Archie Norman, as well as looking at Rishi's visit to the US.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Coming up in this hour.
Our watchdog today has warned that the police force have a limited window of opportunity to rebuild public trust. We'll be speaking to a former Scotland Yard detective to see what he thinks.
And as Donald Trump has been indicted and Rishi Sunak returns from his first official trip to the US as Prime Minister, we'll be speaking to an American political analyst to get a stateside view on this.
We'll also be sharing some of our exclusive interview with Archie Norman on his thoughts on the Schofield saga as the former chairman of ITV.
All of that and much more after the headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, good morning. It's exactly 11 o'clock. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Former US President Donald Trump has been indicted on charges of retaining classified documents at his Florida estate. A source close to the case says he faces 7 charges. This is the second time Trump has been indicted. He's the first former US president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Posting on his social media platform Truth Social, Trump has accused the government of election interference. He's campaigning to make a return to the White House in 2024.
This is warfare for the law, and we can't let it happen. We can't let it happen. Our country is going to hell, and they come after Donald Trump, weaponizing the Justice Department, weaponizing the FBI. We can't let this continue to go on because it's ripping our country to shreds. We have such big problems, and this shouldn't be one of them. It's a hoax.
A Syrian refugee who stabbed a group of toddlers in France, including a British girl, had been denied asylum in the country just days before the attack. The French Interior Minister says the claim was refused because the 31-year-old had already been granted asylum in Sweden 10 years ago. 4 children and 2 adults were injured in the attack yesterday in the Alpine town of Annecy. One of them was 78-year-old Yusuf.
I was sat on the bench. Suddenly, he stood in front of me and tried to stab me with his knife, and I made a movement with my left arm to try and avoid the blow. Fortunately, I was only injured slightly, very slightly in the elbow. Afterwards, I was treated by the fire brigade and paramedics. He was being followed by civilians, so he ran away to the left. He attacked other people, I think, and was caught by the police. I heard the shot.
The Prime Minister says President Joe Biden's experience on China and foreign policy is particularly valuable after signing a new economic partnership with the US. The new Atlantic Declaration includes commitments on easing trade barriers, closer defence industry ties and a data protection deal. Rishi Sunak has called the relationship with the US an indispensable alliance. A teenage boy who died after being followed by police on his e-bike and then collided with an ambulance has been named locally as Saul Cookson. Greater Manchester Police said traffic officers had been following the 15-year-old yesterday in Salford until their car was blocked off by bollards. The force said the collision between the bike and ambulance happened a short time later. The incident has been referred to a police watchdog. The government has announced plans to suspend the windfall tax on oil and gas companies if prices fall to normal levels for a sustained period. Currently, a 75% tax rate is imposed on oil and gas firms. This would be reduced to 40%. The windfall tax was introduced last year to help fund a scheme to lower energy bills for households and businesses. A watchdog says public trust in police has fallen to the lowest level ever and is hanging by a thread. It comes amid a series of scandals and systemic failings. Chief Inspector of Constabulary Andy Cook says he wants legal powers for inspectors to order failing police forces to improve. He says there needs to be definitive action to improve the standards instead of what he describes as glossy strategies and mission statements. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has abandoned Labour's commitment to spending £28 billion a year on Green Prosperity Plan, or a Green Prosperity Plan. Instead, she says the party will gradually increase spending over the course of Parliament. Ms Reeves explained economic circumstances have changed since the announcement 2 years ago, saying Labour now wants to commit to spending only what's needed. And GB News presenter Anne Diamond has revealed to us she's been diagnosed with breast cancer. Known for her work on ITV, the BBC and, of course, here on Breakfast with Stephen and Anne, she's been speaking of her fight against the disease, including undergoing a double mastectomy, and told us how she found out she was being awarded with an OBE on the very same day as her diagnosis.
It was like 9:30 in the morning, but I knew then, because I'd already seen my GP, that I had to go to a breast cancer screening thing. And I spent the entire morning at my local hospital. They did everything: biopsies, x-rays, CT scans, couple of mammograms, everything. And in the end, by lunchtime, I was still there. And a lovely lady with a lanyard around her neck that said, Macmillan Cancer Care. And I knew then that it was serious.
And I'm pleased to say Anne will be returning to GB News to host Breakfast with Stephen Dixon tomorrow, and we can't wait to have her back. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back over to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil, and it will be wonderful to see Anne Diamond tomorrow, won't it?
Absolutely.
Back in her rightful place on your...
I was texting her last night because she said lots of people thought she was on a cruise. I said, that's where I thought you were, Anne. So I was texting her about last night.
Wonderful to see her.
Now, following a string of dreadful scandals and structural flaws, a watchdog has called for broader powers to restore confidence in the police. Inspectors will be able to order failing police forces to improve when there are serious concerns for public safety.
Chief Inspector of Constabulary Andy Cook said that public trust in the police was hanging by a thread and that there was a limited window of opportunity to restore it. Well, join us now to discuss this is Mike Neville, former Scotland Yard detective. Mike, thanks very much for joining us. Do you accept that there's a lack of public trust in the police and that they've got a very limited time in order to restore it? Would you support that analysis?
Absolutely. I think Andy Cook's written a very good report here. It's a tragedy. I was very proud to be a Scotland Yard DCI. Scotland Yard was seen as the top policing agency in the world. But it's just crumbled away. If you look at the detection figures, the number of crimes solved has reduced 2/3 in the last less than 10 years. So, 1 out of 25 burglaries are being solved, 1 out of 100 thefts, 6% of rapes, even stranger rapes, which you think with all the DNA and technology they would have. But it's an utter tragedy, but the police, are still focusing on the wrong things. In the report, it says how many officers are black, how many officers are female. The facts of these, I don't think anybody really cares. If you go to hospital, do you care that 89% of nurses are females? You care that you get the right treatment and the right medication. The public just want a good police force, and they're being let down by politically correct nonsense, to be honest.
Mike, I completely agree with that. We've had lots of views coming in, and Jo says, and when we talk about prioritisation, how are you spending the time? She said, the police came round to my house because I fed wild birds with seeds in my garden. After my busybodying neighbour phoned them to report me, I was so shocked they'd wasted all that time coming round to see me. Don't even think it's illegal. Really, police need to get their priorities right. That's just one example. There are many more from our viewers.
I mean, the tragedy is I still meet hard-working and good quality officers who are absolutely dedicated to the task. But I still work with the police. I'm working with the universities. I've offered several police forces a database of images which could solve hundreds of thousands of crimes, just being more savvy about how we use CCTV and things like that. But a lot of them are simply not interested. All the senior officers in post have been promoted during a time where detecting crime was one of the lower priorities on the police. All these woke investigating Twitter things, recruiting people because the colour of the skin or the sex or sexuality, these are things that the public really don't care about. They just want the police to recruit the right people and deliver a good job and solve crime and make them feel safe in their homes and in their towns.
Now, Mike, you seem to be sort of laying the blame on the door of senior police officers in police forces, and that and I've seen in my own area in West Yorkshire sort of a bit of a disconnect between the senior ranks and the and the people at the chalk face, so to speak. But there is also a feeling among some people that police officers themselves now basically want to go for an easy life and go for the easy things. You know, they'd sooner go and deal with somebody who's been accused of misgendering somebody, or maybe even a motorist doing 25 miles an hour in a 20 zone, because it's easier than tackling a dangerous, violent criminal or a burglar. Do you accept that police officers themselves sometimes just go for the easy life?
Well, absolutely, Phil. I did a Freedom of Information Act, which was reported in the media, that 70% of the Metropolitan Police hadn't arrested one person in a year. I arrested, my best, I think, was 4 in a day. It's just quite incredible. And one of the problems here is the top ranks now are absolutely filled with university graduates, and they've simply recruited their own kind. When I was at Hendon in 1989, at least half the officers had medals on their chest because they were ex-armed forces. Those sort of people are not being recruited into the police. The police need to change the recruiting and sort this out. We need some common sense. You've got university graduates joining who don't think they have to do nights and don't like getting involved in fights. It's just incredible, really. It is a dramatic, it's a big, big mess, and they've got to sort it out. And the Home Secretary could help by saying this: there are no more diversity targets. There are no more targets that have nothing to do with policing. Your job is to reduce crime and catch criminals, and that's all you're going to be judged on. And that would be a move which would really focus the minds.
Mike Neville, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning and saying it like it is.
Forthright views there, weren't there?
We have indeed, and we've got some more of our viewers. David says, exactly like Mike did there, we need to get some retired real police officers back in to advise them how to run a proper police service, stop graduate entrance and recruit from the military and other members of the public with life experience.
Don says here, of course people have lost faith in the police. I have, and I was one for 25 years. And my son and his wife are now in the job. Theresa May is almost entirely to blame. She decimated the police, who are now run by woke and weak leaders. It's absolutely lawless where I live now. All our local police have vanished. And Richard says the problem with everything, from councils to NHS to the police, is bad management. The calibre of people has been in decline for years. Keep those views coming in. Some very strong opinions, as usual, and common sense ones too. Now, earlier this week, we did an exclusive interview with Archie Norman, the chairman of Marks and Spencer's, and he spoke to us about his thoughts on inflation in the UK, and this is what he had to say. There's obviously a massive controversy at the moment about food inflation and the prices in the shops, and people are saying that retailers are profiteering on food, and the government have proposed a cap on food prices. What do you make of what the government proposed, and why is food inflation so high?
We all know why food inflation is high. We had a macro disruption with the Ukraine, the pandemic supply chain disruptions, which resulted in the price of gas, of oil, of wheat, of freight rates all going through the roof. That was nothing to do with the UK. It was what happened in the globe and affected all countries. Now, what is a little bit different here is that we got more knock-on effects from that. That's substantially because we've had a devaluation, so imported prices carry on going up. Also because we were more dependent on gas than other countries, and also because we pushed up wages at a time when labour is scarce. So we put up the minimum wage, and I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but the minimum wage went up 10%. So 1 million retail workers effectively have got a significant wage increase. That's all been passed on to growers, to producers, so their costs are continuing to go up. So now we've got a higher rate of inflation than other countries, but it'll come down. The funny thing about this price cap idea is it was launched just at the time when it was a price cap on essentials was the idea. All the essential prices started to come down. The price cap would probably stop them coming down. So price of butter is coming down, price of bread is coming down, price of vegetable oil is coming down, price of pasta is coming down.
Why do you think it took the Bank of England and politicians by surprise, food inflation staying stubbornly high?
I don't think people understand the anatomy of inflation. I don't think putting up interest rates will make one jot of difference to inflation. I think all it'll do is reduce investment and employment. That's the way it was intended to do, which is not what we need. And I think the government, understandably, inflation is a genuine problem for people. It's a problem for politicians too, and they're looking round for weaponry. Unfortunately, because it's driven by these macro factors, there ain't a lot you can do other than bear down on public sector wages, which they're doing their best to do. There's not a lot you can do. You have to let it wash through the economy and not panic and manage expectations. So I think inflation, there's a good chance inflation will be down to 5-6% by the autumn. It could be lower than that. And then we'll wash through gradually over the next 3 or 4 years to very acceptable levels. It's not actually our problem. Inflation is not our problem in this country. It is a problem for households, of course, but the real problem is productivity, investment and growth.
Coming back to M&S, I read in the paper that M&S were selling one steak at a time on the shelves. They were having one steak on display at a time because of shoplifting, which seemed like a very un-Archie thing to do. Is that really true? Is that really happening in M&S?
I think it really happened in one shop for one day. As soon as Stuart Machin and the team heard about it, that was the end of that. No, because it's a terrible idea. It's an interesting thing that shoplifting and shop theft has increased across the industry in the last 2 or 3 years. So everybody's struggling with this. And of course, M&S steak, M&S beef is all traceable back to the farm, Aberdeen Angus beef. If you're a shoplifter, it's the product of choice. You take that down to the pub and everybody's going to pay a premium for it. So we do have a problem with steak, but no, the wrong way to deal with that is to take it off sale. We want to grow our sales, and that's not going to happen.
Archie Norman there, a superstar, the man who turned round Asda many years ago, turned round ITV. We'll be talking about him, that and the Schofield affair, and now in charge of Marks & Spencer, and he's turned that round as well. And what we like from him is just his common sense approach. He was your boss for a long person. And he's your hero, isn't he?
I'm not ashamed to say that Archie is my hero in life, and he's the person I most look up to. And I learnt more from him at my time at Asda, 12 years at Asda before I entered Parliament, than I've ever learnt before or since.
But I'm going to bring in here now, we've got John McTernan as well, and we've got Charlie Rowley. And what I liked and why we wanted to see Archie Norman, I was confused that people were confused about food inflation. I thought you only need to speak to a man like that. I was speaking to my producers, I was speaking to my shop owners, and all of those things he talked about, whether it was energy bills, whether it was about the minimum wage going up, whether it was about a whole host of other things, that it was coming on board and it was going to stay there for a little bit longer. And how we're going to deal with it. And just see what he said there about inflation, what we've got to do with it, and our bigger issues really are productivity and growth and getting in people into employment.
See, I think the thing is, that was a great exposition of why a great chief executive, a great chairman, would make a terrible politician.
Because he's too honest.
Because there was no empathy there, nothing at all. It was.
Oh,
I'm
going to defend him there. I'm going to defend him there.
Chopping.
Should I tell you why I'm going to defend him there? This is a man who saved ITV. He's a man who saved so there is empathy there. And his parents were doctors. It was really interesting, wasn't it, Phil? He looked for, as he called it, the beating heart of an organisation to make sure it survives.
The political challenge that the government faces, and it's going to fail because facing it, is people feel the cost of living pressures. They don't feel inflation as a separate thing. You can technically discuss inflation, it's rising, it's falling, supply shocks, the Ukraine war, all of these things. Every household during this year, the 2 million during this year, who are coming off a fixed-rate mortgage, going into a new one, we're going to face £400 or £500 a month extra bill on their mortgage. They will not distinguish the cost of butter, the cost of bread, the cost of energy. It's the total pressure
But John,
on their
did you not hear him say you should not be putting up interest rates? He would be protecting all those people with mortgage and thinking about their expense.
People on fixed-rate mortgages are hitting the consequence of last year's terrible budget. It's baked in. The higher interest rates are baked in now, and we've actually had Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak are pretty clear. They would like to have a recession if it freezes out inflation. we're going to have the bank, the Canadian Bank, the US Federal Reserve, people are increasing interest rates even now. All I'm saying is that for people, the totality of the cost of living, all the elements of it, are what they feel pressure about.
Let me bring Charlie in. I mean, do you think John's got a point in the sense that, Archie's saying, look, the interest rates isn't going to make any difference to inflation, which lots of people, including our very own Liam Halligan's been saying for quite some time. But is John right in the sense that people want the government to look as if they're doing something? And so,
John nodded to that one. Yes, the government's got to look. I think that's.
You don't have to do it.
You've just got to let it wash through the system. Is maybe right, maybe true, and most people will probably accept that. But to the public, they want a government that says, "Oh, we're going to tackle it, and we're doing this, that, and the other," even if it's completely pointless what they're doing.
Well, I thought that was a great interview by Archie, and I think, as he was rightly saying, that food inflation is coming down anyway. It's been something that everybody's been affected by, not just in the UK.
So the idea of capping food prices was a disaster.
Absolutely.
Looking like you're doing something and getting it all wrong. And such a socialist thing to do.
Exactly, which is why, the idea when we hear about rent caps, when we hear about any kind of cap, it is, or freezes, I should say, it is just not going to work. But I think the government has done a lot to help people with their energy bills that we stepped in to help, where they've done a lot with the cost of living, which actually, Archie was absolutely right to articulate that there should be investment and productivity in this country, innovation, and you can only attract that if you have, dare I say it, lower taxes, which will help people right across the country.
Why is my hero? Why is the person I most look up to in the country? Can you see that?
Absolutely. And he's inspired me to go and get steak and chips tonight, I think.
What John said about, politicians having to look like they're doing stuff, what I liked about Archie is his cool calmness of analysis and coming to the right decisions rather than looking like you're doing something.
There's a referendum every day on Archie's performance, and that is, are people going into Marks & Spencer's to buy stuff, or as he said, to shoplift the best beef. But the thing about the market is got a brutal honesty to it. Marks & Spencer's took the wrong track, and they're punished by consumers. When you take the right track, you get rewarded. Same with ITV.
John, Charlie, thank you very much. Coming up, Donald Trump has been indicted over his handling of classified documents and faces court on Tuesday. And Rishi Sunak's meeting with President Biden. Well, we'll be speaking to stateside US political analyst to get his take on this.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. We've got your views coming in here. We'll be talking about the police and we need to get rid of woke policing and get down to real police work. Well, Derek says, as someone... he said, I sympathise with the police, says John. Yes, they are renowned for turning up late for crime, sometimes not at all, but I think that if there were more fitting punishments for crimes, then maybe the police would be more encouraged to put their life on the line and bring those criminals to justice. That's interesting, isn't it?
And we were discussing about immigration figures earlier. Sandra says, Dear Esther and Phil, thank you for having Al Mehmet on. He has a real grip on immigration figures. However, people always focus on net migration, but the number that really worries me is the gross figure, now over 1 million. I want to know who we are importing and who we are exporting. I think that's a very good point, Sandra.
Absolutely, especially as you say, 100,000, I think it is, of British people as well leaving the country. Who are they? You're quite right. Who are they and who's coming in? Now, former US President Donald Trump has been charged over his handling of classified documents after he left the White House. This is the second indictment of Mr. Trump and the first ever federal indictment of a former president.
Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden also met yesterday to announce a new economic partnership called the Atlantic Declaration. Biden briefly gave Rishi Sunak a promotion when he referred to him as the Mr. President at the start of the bilateral meeting, but swiftly corrected himself. Well, we're joined now by US political analyst Eric Ham. Eric, thanks ever so much for joining us. Just to start off with Joe Biden's latest gaffe. Seems like a gaffe a day at the moment for Mr. Biden. How many of these can he keep putting together before it actually damages his chances of re-election?
Well, even before Joe Biden became president of the United States, he was always known for being a bit gaffe prone and, of course, known for being very loose with his tongue and things like that. And so I think what we're seeing here is the president is certainly going to be questioned, particularly about his age. But in terms of actually the gaffes, that's not something that I think would deter the president or deter his supporters from actually thinking he's capable of doing the job.
We also read about the Hunter Biden pictures, and we saw those pictures. If it's not Joe Biden going to be tripped up by his own gaffes, what about the gaffes of his family? Will people take more exception to that?
Well, we know Hunter Biden has certainly had his troubles, and this goes back even before Joe Biden became president of the United States. And of course, President Biden has been very transparent about his son's issues and struggles throughout his lifetime. And so that is something that is baked in, once again, when we're talking about Joe Biden as president. And we also have to remember Joe Biden is someone who has been in the public sphere for 4 decades now. And so people actually have a position that's pretty baked in on who and what Joe Biden is, irrespective of his son. And we know that is something that his opponents have certainly used. And we know even House lawmakers are actually engaged in an investigation about Hunter Biden, and we know also that there is an investigation by the federal government, the Department of Justice, IRS, looking into Hunter Biden as well.
And Eric, just finally, obviously the revelations about Donald Trump, Biden's gaffes may not affect his electoral prospects. It seems that the more times that Donald Trump gets indicted or investigated by the police, his poll ratings go up too. I mean, is there a point, might this be the point, which actually this does start to affect Donald Trump's popularity with the American people?
Well, I think Donald Trump's popularity and also his ceiling with the American people, I think he's already reached his zenith. Now the question becomes, does he begin to lose, or is he going to begin, is some of that support, particularly on the right, going to peel off as a result of this latest indictment? And there's still other investigations into the former president. And also the question becomes, can some of these other candidates that are now in the race, can they somehow overtake Donald Trump in the polls? Right now, his lead is very large, and he continues to do very, very well. But of course, there are many questions about the limits to how far he can actually go.
Do you think there's any chance Trump will turn away from wanting to be president? Do you think he could, as he splits his time between the campaign trail and the courthouse? Do you think he might say, not this time?
Absolutely not. In fact, Donald Trump announced very, very early, and there are those who actually think that he is running to actually stave off these many investigations that could lead to indictments that potentially could lead to guilty verdicts.
Eric Ham, US political analyst, thank you very much indeed for giving us your insight into what's going on in American politics at the moment, which is even more exciting than in British politics, to be perfectly honest.
I don't know. both are
marked by investigations at the moment.
It can only be called a roller coaster ride for politics, either side of the Atlantic there. But coming up, we'll be speaking again to Archie Norman, the former chairman of ITV. He's going to give his views, really, on what's been happening with that ITV saga with Philip Schofield. What would he have done if he'd have been in charge of ITV? But now it's time for your headlines with Rhiannon.
Esther, thank you. Good morning. It's 10:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Former US President Donald Trump has been indicted on charges of retaining classified documents at his Florida estate. A source close to the case says he faces 7 charges. This is the second time Trump has been indicted. He's the first former US president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Posting on his social media platform, Trump has accused the government of election interference. He's campaigning to make a return to the White House in 2024. A Syrian refugee who stabbed a group of toddlers in France, including a British girl, had been denied asylum in the country just days before the attack. The French Interior Minister says the claim was refused because the 31-year-old had already been granted asylum in Sweden 10 years ago. 4 children and 2 adults were injured in yesterday's attack in Annecy. The French Prime Minister has confirmed all 4 toddlers have undergone surgery. 2 are still understood to be in a critical condition. A teenage boy who died after being followed by police on his e-bike and then collided with an ambulance has been named locally as Saul Cookson. Greater Manchester Police said traffic officers had been following the 15-year-old yesterday in Salford until their car was blocked off by bollards. The force says the collision between the bike and ambulance happened a short time later. The incident has been referred to a police watchdog. And the Prime Minister says President Joe Biden's experience on China and foreign policy is particularly valuable after signing a new economic partnership with the US. The new Atlantic Declaration includes commitments on easing trade barriers, closer defence industry ties, and a data protection deal. Rishi Sunak's called the relationship with the US as indispensable alliance. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2540 and 1.1654 euros. The price of gold is £1,565.13 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,580 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. The time now is 11:39. And as former chairman of ITV, we asked Archie Norman his thoughts on the handling of the Schofield saga. And this is what he had to say. Going to adrenaline-filled, and I'm going to talk about you now and the massive turnaround that you did at ITV. So I was working in TV at the time, and I knew what a big job that was. At the time, people would have viewed it as a poison chalice to have taken over as the chairman there, whether it was advertising sort of falling, whether it was staff going, whether it was programmes being cut. Why did you take it on? from somebody who had nothing, had never done anything in TV before. Why did you take it on?
Well, because it's what I do. Here was a great company with a great idea and a great beating heart that had fallen on bad times. And I'm not an expert in television. I didn't have to be, but I'm an expert in how you make those sort of organizations tick again. And by the way, one of the reasons I took it on is because nobody else wanted to do it. And you may remember at the time, a series of people had been approached and it had been all over the media, and they turned it down, and they were struggling to find.
I was looking at the odds the week before you took the job, and I don't think your name was there. A whole cluster of other people's names there, but not yours.
Because I got approached when I said to the headhunter, I said, I'll have a discussion, but I'll only meet 3 of the non-executives, and I'm not going to meet any of the executive, and it can't go any further until we've concluded. Because I knew it would leak. And so once in my life, I was able to spring a surprise on the media.
The headline at the time in the Evening Standard, we've got 3 years to save ITV.
Yeah. 3 years was probably an overstatement, but I do think the business would have ended up being part of some US media conglomerate if we hadn't acted. We were lucky too, the ad market improved. The things we did on the whole worked out. So over 5 years, the share price went up 5 times at one point. The sun shone. And you need a bit of that in business.
You talk about the share price. I got the figures. 52p it was just after you arrived, and you took it to 259p. £2.59. So you did and looking at ITV now, people will say it's going through a bit of a bad time with what's gone on. I can't believe that it's rumbled on so long, this sort of Schofield this morning. If you were in charge of ITV now, should it have rumbled on in the papers for so long? Something that's a news channel, that's a TV channel, shouldn't it have got ahead of the curve?
I think in any crisis, corporate or government, the abiding lesson is go to the end point at the beginning, isn't it? Just assume the worst. I don't know in this case whether that would have been possible. ITV, whatever's said, look, on Philip and Holly were a brilliant, while I was there, they were just a brilliant act. This Morning was a great program. And during my time, with 1 or 2 episodes, they were thoroughly professional. And ITV, because it's an entertainment place, it's a place that stuff does happen. And on the whole, the process and practices are very good. They're looking after people and making sure things are done properly, because you have to be in a media type of business. But at the end of the day, workplace relationships do occur. And you can't just assume because they occur that the employer somehow, in some way, at fault. No, sometimes they're good. So I don't think we should read too much into it. It's understandable it's a big story because it's such a human interest story. It's such an extraordinary thing. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to, I don't know what's going to come out of the inquiry. My guess is that we'll find that ITV have handled it pretty well. I'd be disappointed otherwise. And Carolyn McCall's chief executive, she's all over it. She will be.
You don't think any heads are going to have to roll at ITV on the back of this?
I'd be a fool to say yes or no, wouldn't I? Because something could come out. But I don't think we should conclude from this that the ITV is a company with a series of bad practices. I'm sure there are things that could be improved. I think it's a well-run business, looks after people well. And this was something that could happen in a lot of companies. In ITV, when it happens, because it's Philip Schofield, because it is a really moving, actually human tragedy as well, and about what was a great show, and somebody was right up there on a pillar, obviously it's going to be a great public interest.
Well, we'll digest those thoughts in a second or two, but we also asked Archie Norman about his thoughts on the BBC and the licence fee, and this is what he had to say about that. Obviously, your biggest competitor at ITV was the BBC. What do you make of the position of the BBC, the licence fee and things like that? Do you think the BBC licence fee is sustainable? Should it be scrapped?
Part of the difficulty with the BBC is this continuous inability to, as I face into the future in an open way and recognise that it's got to change. No, the licence fee has been actually a very efficient tax for the last 3 decades or so. 90% of households pay their tax, and it's kept it away from income tax. So there's lots have been attractive about it. But In 10 years' time, it's going to be very hard to levy because everybody's watching on different devices around the household or around the workplace. You can't even tell who's watching and who isn't. So license fee, very practical reasons, beginning to come to an end. And it's going to force the BBC to thinking about not just how it's funded, but also therefore what it wants to pay for and what the scope of its activities is. And I think that should be a healthy thing. It's just so difficult for the BBC to say that openly, because every time there's the slightest possibility of any programme being cut or any little chamber orchestra being abolished, there's an outcry, and it's very, very difficult to handle.
Some people might say the BBC is a struggling organisation. There's a vacancy for the chairman of the BBC. Has this got Archie Norman's name written all over it as a job for him?
I'd be very surprised. I think the last thing they want now, following the problems they had with the chairman who was close to the Prime Minister, is to appoint another chairman, not necessarily close to the Prime Minister, but as a former Conservative MP. That might be a controversy too far. To go in there now, the chairman needs a mandate. That's what I would say. It's no good to go in to preside over it and preside over continuation, because that's not going to happen. So whoever takes that role needs to go in with a mandate for change.
We've still got John McTernan and Charlie Rowley with us. John, I'm campaigning hard for Archie Norman to become the chairman of the BBC after his massive triumph, not only at Asda and M&S, but also at ITV, where he transformed their fortunes. As a Labour man, would that fill you with horror, or do you think he's got good qualifications for the job?
He's a great leader. There's no doubt about that. But listen, if we're going to have somebody from the other side of politics, I'd say Andrew Neil. I'd put Andrew Neil in as the chairman of the BBC. I do think whoever's made chair now is a temporary appointment. If a Labour government comes in, there should be a Labour appointment. And I'm a strong believer that the government of the day should, as the current government's doing, make political appointments. So we should have a Labour appointment. What about Baroness Casey, Louise Casey? She's actually a crossbencher. She's great in the inquiry. You direct her an issue, she gets stuff done. She understands working class people's lives. She understands pressures on budgets. She understands the future. And I think Archie Norman's point was exactly right. You can't lead a public organisation like the BBC without a mandate. And what's really clear is nobody in the government at the moment in DCMS has a view about what the future of broadcasting is in terms of UK production for a global market that's been transformed by streaming services, by Apple, by Amazon, by Disney, by Netflix. We're competing in a completely different market than we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago when I was working in television in Carlton TV. And it's the lack of the vision of the future of a creative industry. And from that then flows the role of the BBC.
Charlie, Archie was very supportive of ITV in terms of their handling of the Philip Schofield affair, and basically said, you know, what happened there could have happened in any organisation, really. What did you make of that?
Well, I think two things. If I can first just say about the BBC, I think one of the things that I think its mandate is to inform, educate and entertain. And I think when you move to a lot more competitive, absolutely right, Netflix, Amazon, all of these other streaming services, that's all more geared to entertainment. And I think you do need to retain a broadcaster in some respects where there is the educational element and the informative. Now, as soon as the BBC stops doing that and it becomes one way or the other, perhaps in its broadcasting or its information, it's not educating, it's not providing those programmes for young people where other more entertainment or streaming services that you pay for, if they're not providing it, then I think we lose out. So I think there is something that needs to be retained about the BBC in that respect. On ITV, I think in terms of crisis comms, it's been an absolute disaster. I think it's been a sort of a murder mystery style because of, more questions came out of Philip Schofield's statement, then the questions about what was, Carolyn McCall's involvement. Did Holly Willoughby know about it? Did she not? It became a sort of whodunit, saga. But clearly there was complacency at ITV because they allowed Philip Schofield, I think, and what added to the story, obviously the divisions between other presenters and toxicity, the accusation of toxicity on the set of This Morning, it obviously provides more questions. So I think the complacency at ITV to allow one particular individual to run the show for so many years allowed the ITV executives to take their eye off the ball, and that's why we're in the situation they're in today.
Well, one final clip here with Archie. We do have the exclusive interview tomorrow, different bits of the interview. He's had a long and prosperous career, but it's about this. Rishi Sunak has put AI at the forefront of his agenda this week when meeting President Biden. So I asked Archie Norman what he thinks about AI when other people say it'll be sort of cataclysmic. Here's what he said. I see you've gone on the board of Signal AI, one of the fastest growing artificial intelligence companies in the UK. And the reason I asked you the question is because front pages of the newspaper are things like 2 years to save the world, or it could lead to the extinction of humanity. Where do you think, and what do you think artificial intelligence can do? And are there some protections we've got to put in place?
First, I think this. People talk about AI as if it's a thing. You know, it's like it's a chemical reaction we can apply to things. It's not. There's thousands of different sorts of AI. It's been around for a long time. Signal essentially they absorb data from around the globe and use what they call natural language processing, machine learning. So the computer can understand what the words mean, and they can select out the words that are relevant to you to give you a summary of the news that you're interested in. That's what it does. It can understand sentiment. It can understand which words are good and which words are bad, which words are angry. So there's lots of really mundane things that so-called AI or more intelligent programmed computers can deal with. The worry is about what you get when large, say, infrastructure systems are controlled by AI, or the traffic lights are controlled by AI. And if they started to go haywire, what would you do, to take an example? And of course, media. So if you look at ChatGPT, which I'm sure you've all been on ChatGPT, once information gets into there, it's hard to get in out of it. So then falsehoods become prevalent. And the AI system, I don't know about this, but I read your Wikipedia entry.
Oh no, I shudder to think what's on there.
It's not all correct.
Oh, that's not a huge shock.
But you try and change your Wikipedia entry, it's bloody difficult. Now, that's not AI, but it's an illustration of what can go wrong.
And that's why we were putting these questions to Archie Norman, a man who is there at the moment, who's on the board of the fastest growing AI company in the United Kingdom. So the talk with Biden, with Rishi, I'm turning it to you here, John, was all about what we needed to do. We're going to have the first conference in the UK. We're going to set up these sort of government think tanks, maybe protection. But somebody who's cool, calm-headed like that, thinking really, like you said before, government thinking they've got to do stuff?
Well, I was in DC this week, and I'm having breakfast Wednesday morning, and some police motorbikes went past the window. I thought, that's quite a lot. I was nearly near the White House, and suddenly I saw a black car with a British flag on it go past, and I thought, that's the Prime Minister on his way to the White House. Look, AI is a big issue. It's a big issue because it's going to do to white-collar jobs, a lot of white-collar jobs, what computerized manufacturing did to lots of blue-collar jobs. So things which can be done routinely, press releases, aggregating information research, that's going to be done by computers. We know that. The funny thing about this government is we just had an AI white paper published very recently, and now they're all launching a new initiative. But I don't know what their view is, and that's the thing. A government has to have a view on the future. Let's see what that view is.
Charlie, just very, very quickly, if you can. Archie said that regulating AI would be silly. It'd be like regulating the internet when that first started out. Do you think that this talk of regulating the internet, the AI, is silly? Very quickly.
I think it needs a bit of work, because we know that there are great things about the internet, but there are also a lot of horrors, and so we also need to be careful about new technology going forward to protect the most vulnerable. And I think it needs a lot more work than probably what's out there
So
already.
I think the discussion, the talk about it, but it is to do it calmly and see how it's working, and not jumping to a decision. I want to thank John McTernan here and Charlie Rowley for being with us today. So you've been watching Friday Morning with Esther and Phil, and we're back tomorrow at 10 a.m. with more of our exclusive interview with the M&S chairman, Archie Norman.
Up next, it's GB News Live with the wonderful Mark Longhurst.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine, warm and sunny one for most, but again, that east coast will be pretty dull and an increasing chance of some showers in the southwest. Our weather patterns are on the change. This low pressure is approaching. The high that's been dominating is drifting away. We're still between the two, but down to the southwest, more cloud than recent days with the threat of some showers through the day, particularly over the Channel Isles. A bit of cloud will stick to that east coast again, so again pretty glum and pretty chilly here, but most of the UK again seeing plenty of pretty warm sunshine with temperatures getting into the high teens in the east but the mid-20s further south. Again quite a bit cooler on that east coast with the breeze and the cloud, which will edge back inland a little overnight, but mostly the eyes are down to the southwest tonight because some heavy, even thundery showers are likely to develop and spread across southwest England initially. Very hit and miss, but some downpours certainly on the cards. For most, though, again, it will be a dry night. Temperatures dipping again in Scotland, in some rural spots well down into single figures, but most of us start the weekend in double digits, and it's going to be quite a warm and humid weekend. Again, some parts of the east coast looking cloudy.